Hey guys, and welcome back to my sewing room. If you're new here, my name is Heidi and I make all kinds of sewing projects, mainly corsets and undergarments and so on. Today I am going to show you guys a really exciting project. I started this project a while ago and I just finished it, and I really didn't know how challenging it would actually be, but I really like the finished product, so stay tuned. So I have been making a corset from the movie Anna Karenina. The movie is from 2012 with Keira Knightly. There is a scene in the movie where she is wearing this mustard colored corset with a lot of like red accents and so on. It has a lot of details that I've never done before, and I'm just going to show you guys the process, so enjoy. There aren't a lot of good pictures of this corset, but from what I can tell, it has a spoon busk. There is a sort of specific design to the cups. There is a kind of hip panel in a way, and like a close-up you can see that there are some details on the, I'm not sure what these inserts are, and the fabric is a mustardy color with a red plaid pattern. I just looked at the film and just took some stills from the film, and these are horrible in terms of quality. You can see that there is a lace up in the back, and here you can also see some details. So there is some sort of embroidery seams along this corset, and here you can also see more clearly that the eyelets are red, and there is a red bias binding on this as well. And I'll just have to eyeball the rest, I think, and see how close I can get it. I found this pattern on Etsy. It has a similar detail on the bust. It is quite curved over the hip, the same kind of finish where it's quite a lot thinner at the bottom and then it flares out like this. And I can also see that this has some embroidery details that are similar to the corset in the film. I think this is a good way to start. So this is the Black Snails pattern number 0321, and I'll link that below. I've been working on a mock-up, but I've done a lot of stuff to it. I'm gonna show you the original mock-up where I just simply follow the pattern. So you have this method of creating fullness over the bust. So what I want to change, because it's a very clear curve in the film, and also this back panel clearly kind of ends in a thinner part here, so it seems to be like a separate thing. So I sort of narrowed this part here to make room for this curved part here. I just snipped this one off and created a narrower curve here and made like a two-part curve over the hip. It seems to fit okay. I'm a bit unsure about this curve right here, if it sits right. It's supposed to cinch you quite a bit, so I found it a bit harder to adapt the pattern for that reason, because it does have quite a lot of room in the back, but I think you're supposed to lace it kind of tightly. Another change that I made is here. This ended up being too big, this curve. So instead of narrowing these, I just narrowed the middle. For this pattern, the instruction says to use Coutil as an outer layer, but since I want the specific color, I'm not gonna do that. So to give it the support that you need to lace it this tightly, I'll have Coutil as the inner fabric instead, because I don't think you can get mustard colored Coutil, as far as I found at least. So I'm gonna use a mustard colored linen fabric on the outside. Hopefully that's gonna work out fine. I just placed the pattern pieces out here and I think it looks okay. I'm gonna start off by cutting into the front piece. So I'm gonna cut them out and then place these pieces into it. I'm going to sew the Coutil layer first and make boning channels in that. And then I'm gonna sew the outer fabric afterwards. I'm going to sew this and the panel next to it, and then the back and the panel next to that separately, because then I can see more clearly how I want the side seam. I just sewn the two front and the two back together so far, and I'm gonna do these two pieces. I'm just gonna do a gathering stitch there and there, sew these two pieces onto their respective neighbors here, and then do the middle at the end. But it looks like it will be okay, and also this part on the hip. So I think I can just go ahead and finish it. So I have finished both sides now, and I have top stitched one of them. I'm gonna top stitch this and take it from there. I just noticed when I tried on the finished Coutil layer that this part in particular just didn't fit right. So what I did was that I just used this piece of scrap cotton fabric. I cut this piece that was like covering this whole area, because I saw on the pictures of the original corset that this piece is indeed a 3-part piece. Also, I saw that there was some gaping up here. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take this apart and redo some things, but I think this is gonna look better, so it'll be worth it in the end. So here's the fabric I'm considering using along with textile marker. So I just want to test that this even works. I'm just going to take off a piece of fabric and use as a sort of test square. Not a square, but you know. I'm gonna check both of these colors. Maybe also this, to just see what kind of gives the best effect, what gives the best overall look. With the mustard yellow and the red, it can sort of look ketchup and mustard-esque. I found a fabric that had like mustard and red squares, but it was really like bright mustard and red, so it looked like a sausage truck thing. That's not the impression I want to give. Alrighty, so we have the 3 colors here, and for this project I prefer this one. I found the webpage of the designer who made this corset for the film, and that was the real first place where I found good pictures. It says on the webpage that the corset is made up of 2 layers of linen and that they are sewn together. So what I just tested was to just sew this kind of plaid pattern, and it looks a lot more like what I saw in the pictures. So this leads me to believe that this pattern is actually what keeps the 2 layers of linen together. Now I'm not going to scrap the Coutil layer, both because it's a waste of material and it takes too much time, and it's the inside, so it doesn't matter that much, but I think maybe the solution to the outside would be to do this. A big change in terms of the way ahead, but I think there is something about the way it looks that I think is kind of cool. And this is a more like burgundy thread that I think makes it a bit more classy than like a high red. I'm actually planning right now to try to make it using the original fabric, but the other side. Because the thing is, even in the places where I got the strongest pattern from the markers, it's not really visible on the other side. So I think it should be okay to use this though. I'm just going to cut this, and then I'm going to cut these that are set into the gaps. So here I have not sewn the pattern on the grain. I've just tried to sort of follow what it looks like on the original garment. Now the positives here is that I can follow the grain lines on the pattern that I have. It feels a bit more safe in terms of the fit. The negatives is that I have to sew this pattern on each pattern piece and just sort of adapt the direction of the plaid pattern for each piece and what it looks like on the pictures. It also doesn't seem like a very logical way of doing it. It seems a lot more logical to embroider the whole fabric with a pattern and then cutting out the pieces, and if the pattern is on the bias, then the piece is on the bias. The alternative is that I sew the pattern on the fabric and then I cut out the pieces according to what it looks like in the pictures. That means having some of the main pieces on the bias. That is easier in terms of the plaid pattern. It seems more logical. I can do the plaid pattern in the same direction as the sort of markings that I've already made on this fabric piece. The negative is that I'm not sure how the pieces will behave once I cut them on the bias compared to the fact that the pattern is drafted not on the bias. However, the inner layer, which is the one that will take up most of the strain, is not cut on the bias and it is a more sturdy fabric, but I'm really not sure. I think, however, that I'm going to do the latter. So I'm going to do that and hopefully I won't live to regret it and it will look okay. So what I'm going to do now is just to sew on the lines on the grain of the fabric. Okay, now, this took me 3 days and I think that's even maybe less than it actually was. So before deciding to do this, I cut the front panels according to the grain lines on the pattern. So I think what I'm gonna do first of all now is to just cut the rest of the pattern pieces. So what I will do is I will cut everything exactly on the bias because that is what it looks like. So instead of using the grain line on the pattern pieces for the actual grain line, I will use the grain line and put it on 45 degrees. So after cutting all the different panels, I decided to use the front panels I already had and just sew the pattern on the bias. These are all cut on the bias. So before doing anything with these, I'm putting those away for a second and I'll start working on the front panel, putting in the gussets and everything. Now here are the two front pieces all finished. For this one, the gussets have been cut on the bias, but the pattern is sewn on the grain. I'm not sure if there's a huge difference. It feels like they're sort of poking out a bit more maybe because of this direction not being on the grain but on the bias, so maybe they give in a bit more. I also did notice that I found it slightly more difficult to ease in the fullness along these edges. So that is like the main issue, which I was prepared for, I would say. The next part will be to add the second panel on both of these sides. I basically stitched together the back panel with a sort of hip panel, and I just discovered that the seam here felt too high to me. And I'm not sure how that happened. Maybe I didn't take into account the fact that I had to add some to the length because I have a long back. So this takes that into account, but then the back panel doesn't seem to do so. I'm gonna sew this back on, but I will hardly have any seam allowance in this corner. Hopefully that'll be fine. So I took some off this hip gusset and I sewed it on further up on the actual back panel. I have to transfer the changes that I made here to the lining. I will have to go back and do that, but I'll do that off camera. It's just some tweaking here and there. The next step will be to insert the busk. I don't have the busk right now. I have a 12-inch, I need a 14. So I've ordered that, so hopefully that will be arriving soon. One thing that I have to do is do the flossing, the embroidery seam on the lower part here on both the gussets of the cups. So that will be next while I'm waiting for the spoon busk, the new one. I'll just be doing a whip back stitch across the seam here, or along the seam. It's hard to tell from the pictures if it is on top of both fabrics or sort of like in this overlap here. What I think I'll do is just to do it through both layers, and that is basically because in that way it serves a purpose of securing the gusset. So I'll just do a quick back stitch first, and then I'll do the whip back part with a yellow thread afterwards. And then there is some flossing. I did a test with just different colors. So I did a whip back stitch here, and then I tested the flossing. So I know, at least I think I know how I'm gonna do it. On the original there are two colors used, both for the whip back stitch like here, but also for this flossing bit. So I'll try to incorporate a red thread as I go along on both sides, and also the one on top. I also have the satin bias binding here that I'm going to use on the top, and I just feel like that along with this just clashes a bit too much as opposed to this red right here. It just feels like it's less of a clashing color. Unfortunately, I am going to redo this. After having a look at it, I do prefer this color. So I'm going to take it off and I'm going to exchange it for this. I think it looks nice. I'm gonna do the same for the others as well, and we'll see. Okay, so now I have received a new spoon busk. This is the one that I had before, and this is the new one that I got. This is a 14-inch one. Before doing anything with this, I'm going to sew down the back here. So let's say I use a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Adding this gets us there. I should have 1.5 for the grommets, I feel. So I'm just going to sew these pieces together now, and then I will make boning channels later for the back. I have taken the side of the busk with the hooks and just lined it up. I gave myself a 2.5 centimeter gap at the top here. I just went down and drew a line on each side of these hooks. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. These are both layers together, and I will just sew along the front here, stopping before each gap and then continuing after the gap to the next gap, and so on, leaving these open. So try to get it in here. Right, I think that fits nicely. So I'm just going to baste along the busk edge, and then I'll do a top stitch around the whole busk. So next up I will mark where the studs on this side are supposed to poke through. So I just put through one of the studs. I think it should fit okay with the placement that I have. So I'm using a combination of this awl that could definitely have been bigger, but this was what I got at the time. And I'm also using these knitting needles to enlarge in the hole. This hole right here really unraveled. Yeah, that happened when making the holes. Okay, so I feel like this went well except for the obvious one that I mentioned previously, this one. But what I'm gonna do now is just to again baste and then sew with a sewing machine and the red thread that I did on the other side. So if you guys can see here, first of all, the busk doesn't really go in properly, and also it really drags here. So I feel like both on the top and under here, it is a bit small in order to really lay in close. What I've done in order to try to remedy this is that I think I will actually alter the cups. I wasn't too thrilled by that idea originally, but it's not a huge deal to do it at this point. Okay, I have to take away the embroidery. That's the sad part because that took a while. But other than that, it is just changing out these panels, I think. Here is the original gusset pattern piece. So what I did was just to trace that and add to the middle as well as the top. Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys. I have increased this cup. And there is still some like fit issue here. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe it will be better once you have the boning here. I'm guessing it will be. I think I'm still gonna go for the bigger size and see if having boning in will change anything. So I think maybe that I will do the embroidery seams first on this one, see how it looks. Try to put in the boning, at least in some of the boning channels. And yeah, take it from there. One change that I think I'll make, however, is that since the busk is now in, I think I will do the embroidery seam through both layers. And I think I will do the embroidery seam here on the inside, just because when I do the flossing at the bottom, I won't have to do it sort of over the edge. I've done the embroidery on some of these seams, but before I'm doing the one over here, I will put in the boning so that I don't close up the boning channels. I'll be taking some off the lower part here, and also I'll be taking a bit off the top, but not a lot.
upon trying it on again, I discovered that it is in fact too big over the bust, and I decided to take it in like this on the middle, which also makes it more similar to the original, and also top stitch over the front here to make it as invisible as possible. This worked out so much better than I feared it would, and it actually looks better than it did at any point in the process. So after this, it's just putting on the bias binding and then just lacing it up and trying it on.
I know this isn't a good match for the bias binding, but I'll use it for now and I'll change the bias binding later just because I prefer this color combination over this color combination. And I'm using these needles to help me get through the eyelets just because they're a bit tighter. So here are just some of my final thoughts. I am overall really happy with this project. The things that I would change if I were to do this again, the color and the style of the bias binding, I would like to have it more of a matte, darker red. Second, to sew this pattern on the fabric, on the bias, but cut the pattern pieces on the grain. In retrospect, I think it would work better. Just take the whole fabric piece with a pattern on the bias and just cut it on the grain. Another thing I maybe would have done differently is to have a thicker embroidery seam along the seam lines and maybe use the yellow for the back stitch and the red for the whipped around stitch, because that will make the red seam a bit more prominent. Yeah, and also what I would have done would be to make a bit more of a complete mock-up with the busk inserted and maybe also some kind of lacing in the back, just to not have to do so many alterations as I went along. Those are my kind of final thoughts, but overall I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think it's really cool. It is quite close to the original and it fits a lot better than I thought it would. So here it is. This is the finished product. I am super happy with this. I think it looks so cool. I love all the details on the cups and with the spoon busk. It's a really comfortable busk to wear and I like how it sort of has more of a shape to it. So if you guys enjoyed this video, I hope you will consider subscribing, and if you have any requests or wishes for future projects, please let me know, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.